Hi there and welcome. My name is Anna Havliana and I am the founder of Addicted to Busy. I'm going to potentially apologize in advance as I'm just getting over a cold. So I've got a cough drop ready and I may need to take a couple sips of water as we go. But I just want to welcome everybody onto the webinar today. I am extremely glad that you could make time for yourself today, and I'm excited for what I'm about to share with you. For those who don't know me, I got my start in property management over 10 years ago. And most of my career has been in multifamily residential management, but I've also done office, industrial, and a couple of retail sites. I've had the pleasure of working for mid-sized local property management companies, as well as a large Fortune 500 company. And in 2018, I started Addicted to Busy with the hopes of helping other people reclaim work-life balance. And I had no clue what was in store for 2020 and just how badly our industry would need to completely redefine what that even means. So, a little bit about me and why I do what I do. When I started in property management, I started at a 450 unit market rate residential site in St. Paul. And on my first day of work, that site was occupied at 80% and budgeted at 96. So clearly there was a lot of work to do there. And having no knowledge of the industry, I just jumped in and did the work, and I burned myself out multiple times. At one point in my career, I was working for a company that was based out of Chicago, but they only had one property in the Twin Cities. So there was no upward mobility for me unless I wanted to move to Chicago, which my husband did not want to do. So I had to seek out a new job. And I was feeling really burned out at the time. So I thought maybe it was time for me to switch from residential management into commercial management. I had this idea that commercial property managers had better work-life balance. So I decided two things. I decided I was willing to take a title demotion, and I was also willing to take a pretty substantial pay cut in order to switch over to commercial. But I really thought that it was going to be worth it. I thought I was going to have work-life balance. I thought I was going to have hobbies. I thought I was going to have a life. And that's not really what happened. Essentially, I cost myself a couple $1,000s a year to learn one very important lesson. And that is that work-life balance has nothing to do with your employer. It has everything to do with your ability to manage your mind and set your boundaries. And so once I figured that out, I kind of became obsessed with that concept. And now teaching others how to balance their work alongside their personal goals is what I love doing. So I do need to give you full disclosure that I have been certified as a life coach. And if that makes you want to roll your eyes, that's totally fine. I was pretty judgmental about hiring a coach at first. And I promise you that I'm not going to try and sell you anything at the end of this. But the truth is that coaching really worked for me. Prior to coaching, I was burning the candle at both ends, and I felt like I was giving and giving and giving to both my career and my family, but it didn't really feel like I was making progress either way. I felt like I couldn't shut my phone off to be present for my life outside of work. And when I was at work, I was struggling to do my best work because I was feeling so unfulfilled outside of the office. So the year of my wedding, I signed up with a coach and I had one goal in mind. I just wanted to lose weight for my wedding. And I thought that I was going to get a meal plan and an exercise routine, but that is not what happened. Instead, my coach taught me how to say no. She taught me what a boundary was and how to set it. She taught me how to make difficult decisions and also that it's okay to let other people down from time to time. And what happened that year was that I did reach my goal weight, but so many other wonderful things happened. I started doing things that I really didn't think I would ever do. I finished my CPM. I bought my first rental property. I think that was a year I also paid off all of my consumer debt. And then the year after that, I ran a marathon, which I just never thought that I would do. And all of those things happened because of the tools that I learned and because I was creating a better distinction between my work life and my personal life. And so that's what I'd really love to share with you today. I know that our industry is struggling with burnout. And so the more techniques that we can share with one another that are working, the easier it's going to be to reduce employee turnover. My ultimate goal for property managers is to get them to a place where their workday no longer exhausts them. I know that I've done my job when a manager can leave their office at 5 p.m. with time and energy left to spare to do the things that they love. So today I want to share two of my favorite concepts that really will help you conserve more of your energy. That is the rabbit hole runway, and then training ourselves to focus on one thing at a time. So before we get started, I want to make sure that we all have the same vision in mind. When I say coach, I mean literal coach, like a basketball coach, a track coach, a football coach. All coaches have the same thing in mind. They want to win the game. But in order to create a winning team, they don't just play the game over and over and over again. Instead, a coach will have their team train. They're going to scope out challenges, run drills, and talk strategy. And that's exactly what I do in my work. We train, we scope out challenges, we run drills, we talk strategy. Today, I'm going to give you a worksheet that would be one of the drills that you would do over and over and over again until you really improve your capacity to focus on one thing at a time. Now, one of my favorite parts about my job is showing people that they're really not alone, that there's nothing wrong with them, and that they can get a handle on work-life balance. And the way to move past all of this is very simple, but it's not easy. It's a 3-step process with the goal of reducing overwhelm, increasing productivity, and creating more time in your day so that you can start doing more of what you love. Step 1, we've got to uncover how we're getting in our own way. Step 2, we have to get very intentional with what we want to be doing. And then step 3, we have to fill that newfound time with things that light us up. So here's how it works. When we unpack what's getting in our way, we'll eventually stop doing the things that we don't want to do. Essentially, we'll stop self-sabotaging behaviors. Things like overscrolling, overeating, overworking can be one of them, or overspending. What we want to do is regain more time and energy that's been missing from our daily life. Once we've reclaimed that time and energy that we used to spend on those tricky habits, then we start focusing on working intentionally and efficiently. And this is where we amp up productivity by implementing some much needed boundaries and learning how and when to say no. Once we've stopped self-sabotaging and started working more efficiently, now we get to the good part. There's going to be more time and energy available to you to get back to doing what you want to do. Spending time with family, picking up an old hobby, or actually taking a real vacation. Once these 3 pieces start working together, it gets even better. When you're doing things that make you truly, truly happy, you no longer need those old self-sabotaging habits. Doing things like scrolling and overdrinking just aren't appealing anymore because your life is fun and interesting. And when you have fun and interesting things scheduled for yourself, you actually want to be more efficient at work because you're excited for what you're going to do outside of your job. And this is balance. A life where your work supports a fulfilling life and your life makes work worthwhile. So today we're going to step into step 2, and we're really going to focus on reducing multitasking and increasing our capacity to focus on one thing at a time. When we talk about property managers, I really think that this industry draws in some of the most go, go, go personalities that I've ever met, as well as some perfectionist personalities as well. What I've learned about working with property managers is that before they'll even consider taking more than 10 minutes off of work or checking out for the day, I have to convince them that they've already done enough. And when we talk about work-life balance, the one thing that I hear over and over again is, I don't have time. So today, that's all we're focusing on. It's true that there's really not enough time in the day to do everything that we want to do. There's this famous quote attributed to Henry Ford saying, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Now, we all know what happened. He had to think outside the box and deliver the next best thing that we didn't even know to ask for, which was the car. When I think about this for our industry, if I had asked property managers what they wanted, they would say more time. But just as Ford couldn't make horses go any faster, I can't magically give you an extra 10 hours of time each week. So we have to give ourselves something different. And what that is increasing our ability to focus on one thing at a time. So to start with, I really want to normalize why we even have this problem. When I started in property management, there was a day that you could leave the office at 5 or 6 p.m. You would lock the door and you would be able to leave work at work for the simple fact that we did not have email on our phones. So right now, there's a couple stats that I want to go over with you. The average person spends 209 minutes checking work email and 143 minutes checking personal email. That is almost 6 hours of just straight email per day. When are we supposed to meet with our tenants, walk our sites, prep resident events if email is taking 6 hours out of our day? Next, a study found that the average millennial checks their email at 6:37 a.m. and that people are checking emails while watching TV or a movie. So essentially what's happening here is our work days, which used to be from 9 to 5, are now extending in some cases from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And then this last set here, and this is what we're going to focus on today. 19% of people check email the second it hits their inbox. And employees spend more than 90 minutes per day recovering from email interruptions. This causes a big problem because our ability to focus on one thing at a time has become fractured. And as property managers, we're constantly interrupted. Gone are the days when you locked the office and left work at work. Work is now following us around in our pockets. So to kick this conversation off, we need to have a chat about distraction and focus. And to do that, we're going to chat about a concept that a client and I actually named together while we were coaching in a session, and we call it the rabbit hole runway. So to give a little background here, if you all remember, the term rabbit hole came from the movie Adventures in Wonderland. And I'm assuming most of us have seen this movie, but for those of us who haven't, the tale follows a young girl named Alice who quite literally sees a rabbit and she follows it down to a hole where a crazy world exists. And I love this quote from Kathleen Schultz in The New Yorker. She says, in the original story, Alice falls for quite a while, long enough to scout out the environment, grab some food off a passing shelf, speculate about other parts of the world, drift into a reverie about cats, and nearly fall asleep. And this sounds like us on the internet. In the current use of rabbit hole, we are no longer necessarily bound for a wonderland. We're just in a long attentional freefall with no clear destination and a manner of all things flashing past. The part that gets me here is that she called it an attention freefall with no clear destination. And I think that's so true. Oftentimes we get stuck in this rabbit hole. We've gone completely unconscious. We're no longer aware of time or our surroundings, and yet we are using up time and energy on something that's not going to get us anywhere. Now, we're all familiar with the current culture's definition of a rabbit hole. Typically, when we think of rabbit holes, we think of the internet, like how we might get on our mobile device to check the weather, and then somehow we open Instagram, and the next thing you know, we're buying something off of Etsy.
But we actually go down other types of rabbit holes, specifically as it pertains to work. And this is where the rabbit hole runway comes in. The rabbit hole runway is the best indicator that you have stopped working intentionally and instead have started working reactively or habitually. In other words, you are distracting yourself from work with other work. So for me, what this would look like is like, I might have 2 emails drafted on one screen, but neither ready to send. There would likely be a report open in Excel in the background. I might have payables open on another screen, also not finished. And there's likely a tab with either an Instacart or a Target order in process. Not to mention, I probably have conversations going on in Teams or on my phone. And I get it. Sometimes we had to open that report because we needed it to mention or to respond to one of those emails. But in a world where attention spans are decreasing by the day and the expectations of us are increasing by the minute, I really believe that the best property managers are going to be the ones who know how to manage all of those distractions and be able to work with a high level of focus. Our attention is a very, very limited resource, and every day there are more and more distractions that are created with the sole purpose of getting our attention. This is one of my favorite books, The Organized Mind by Daniel Levitin, and in it, he explains that there is a cost every time we switch tasks. So to summarize, anytime we change what we're focused on, we cause our brains to burn up more glucose. And glucose is what you need in order to stay focused and do your best work. So when you're in that rabbit hole runway of switching from task to task, you're killing that energy source. And so it's no wonder why at the end of the day, we're exhausted, we're emotionally drained, and we're more likely to snap or maybe skip on doing the tasks that we want to do for ourselves. So the craziest part of all of this is that when you learn how to stay focused on a task, you reduce the need for glucose. So staying focused on one task at a time actually takes less energy. This reminds me of the difference between city driving and highway driving. Driving in the city is less efficient than driving on the highway because your car's engine has to start and stop and adjust itself frequently. It burns more gas because the car has to work harder. On the flip side, highway driving is easier on your engine because the car has to do less work to maintain that same speed. The same thing happens with our brain. Our brain is a powerful engine, and you have a choice in how you care for that engine. Now, I will be the first to admit that our work environment is really not always set up to foster time or space to work uninterrupted. The one thing I see repeatedly across all property management job descriptions is that the candidate must be able to multitask. But research shows that multitasking is actually not effective, can lead to more mistakes, thereby creating more work that we have to go back and clean up. So the good news is that once you start catching yourself in that rabbit hole runway, you're going to give yourself a higher chance of interrupting yourself before you've lost too much time and energy. If you're finding yourself either repeatedly burned out or that it's difficult for you to focus on one thing at a time, it's really worth just paying attention to how much you are task switching. What I want you to know is that if you do this, which most of us do, there's nothing wrong. We all do it from time to time, but you've got to know how to get yourself out. So what do you do if you have caught yourself in a rabbit hole? Now, there's no clear answer to this. Everybody works in different ways. And the answer to this will likely depend on whether or not you have an upcoming deadline. But the first thing that you must do is just stop. Stop what you're doing and just acknowledge that you're bouncing from task to task. And then we want to give ourselves a couple options to get us out of this. So the first thing that you can try is number one, just recap what you're doing. The easiest thing is to grab a Post-it, write down everything that you have pulled up on your computer screen, and then take a look at it. You might be able to make sense of an order that things should be completed in. So with that example that I gave you earlier of the 2 open emails, a bid open in the background, an Excel report, you might be able to find the order that it should go in. So perhaps you were working on a report, but you realized that you needed a final bid, and perhaps the email was open because your boss was asking for that report. In this case, you can see a clear order of operations. Get the bid updated, change the report, and then email your boss. There's no need to have all 3 things open at once. If that doesn't work, the next thing that you can try and do is just list out your deadlines. Oftentimes we know what our deadlines are, and we may even have them listed on our calendar. But when we see them clearly written out or typed out, we offer our brains a different way of interpreting what's being asked of us. Once you have the list of deadlines approaching, underneath each deadline, just list out the smaller steps that need to be completed. Again, the action of listing out your steps isn't to say that we don't know what we're doing or that we're disorganized. All we want to do is get ourselves to stop from jumping to task so that we can conserve all of that precious glucose that your brain needs. And then last, the third thing that we can do if we're in a rabbit hole runway is just some good old self-reflection. So many of us bounce from task to task to task because we're avoiding one task in particular. Usually it's something that we have very little experience in, or in some cases, it's something that many people might have their eyes on. So when we show up to work on that task, we freak ourselves out and do something else instead, because we're worried about making a mistake, or we're worried about getting negative feedback. Now, the trickiest part about this reaction is that all the while, we get to say that we were busy and that we were working all day. And sure, that's true, but we were also just avoiding completing that difficult task. If you find yourself in this position, there's a couple things I want you to know. A, there's nothing wrong with asking questions or asking for help or simply saying that you don't know how to do something. The best managers aren't the ones who know it all and never ask for help. The best managers are the ones who fully acknowledge that they have knowledge gaps and then actively seek to fill them. Next, discomfort is crucial for growth. That task that you're avoiding because it seems hard may in fact be very hard, but it will get easier if you allow yourself to move through it. The way that you react to uncertainty and discomfort will have a huge say in how far you go in your career. The presence of discomfort is not a problem. It's a necessary piece of growing into the next level manager that you're going to be. And then finally, the purpose of the rabbit hole runway is to simply clue us into our work habits. When you uncover that you're fearing a task, nothing has gone wrong. You're still human, and all you need to do is ask for help. Finally, if these suggestions are not working, you may need to really stop in and check with how you're feeling. Burnout is a real thing, and in this day and age, I think we're all more susceptible to it than we think. The symptoms of burnout don't always get our attention until it's far too late. If you find yourself in a state of burnout, please hear me when I say this. You cannot outwork burnout by doing more. You must stop and rest. One of the reasons why I suggest managers stop and write everything down on a piece of paper is because it helps you conceptualize what's going on. So often, our minds are swimming in various work deadlines, as well as all of the expectations and appointments that you have for your personal life and your families. And when we're just swimming in all of those thoughts and they're not written down, it's very easy for anxiety and overwhelm to start creeping in. So when we take a minute to write things down, we give ourselves an opportunity to problem solve. I think that one of the fears that people have when it comes to figuring out work-life balance is that they think I'm just going to tell them to cut down their work hours. And many people can falsely assume that means I'm going to ask them to do less, which of course leads to many other fears. Mainly that if you're working fewer hours, that you will produce less, and therefore you won't get promoted or receive a raise. And that is not what we're going for here. What we're really trying to do is figure out how to produce more results, but on less time and energy. Being away of your rabbit hole runway is one of the easiest ways to regroup yourself and remind yourself to work intentionally instead of reactively. Next, I think I mentioned this before, but I really think the managers who will be most successful are going to be the ones who've retrained themselves to focus their attention on one task at a time. And I get it. As property managers, it's part of our job description to be able to multitask as needed. But there's a myth that productivity means doing a lot of things. But true productivity comes down to doing things intentionally and doing them very well. If we're judging our productivity upon how much we do instead of how well we do it, we tend to rush. And unfortunately, rushing increases the chance for errors or miscommunications, which means that we end up having to go back and fix things or reiterate what we meant. So doing all of the things does not always save time. There was a study done by Gloria Mark at UC Irvine, and she studies digital distraction. This is her sole focus. And they found that it takes an average of about 25 minutes to return to a task after you've been interrupted. I want you to think about that for a second. Every time you allow yourself to be distracted, you're costing yourself almost a half hour of just trying to get back into the zone. And this little graph on the left here, I want to show you just how much this costs us. This top blue line represents a task that takes 1 hour. This means 60 minutes of fully uninterrupted work. Now, the second line shows what happens to our time when we allow ourselves to get distracted every 15 minutes with a 5-minute interruption. Now, that's being super gracious. We are property managers, and we're definitely interrupted more than 3 times an hour, and it's definitely longer than 5 minutes at a time. But even at that, these small 5-minute interruptions means that it's going to take us 25% more time to complete that task. If we're a little bit more realistic, we can see that even a 10-minute interruption every 15 minutes means that task will now take us 50% longer to complete. Multitasking is counterproductive. Every time your brain switches tasks, it takes more energy to switch back. So each time you task switch, you tire your brain out. If we do this repeatedly throughout the day, it's no wonder we're really tired at the end. So we've gone over multitasking. We've discussed how it takes less effort to focus on one thing at a time. And so now what we want to talk about is how to get more done with less energy. So an example that I want you to consider for yourself, imagine that you have 5 big tasks that need to get accomplished and then smaller 20 tasks that need to be accomplished. And I'm going to play out 2 different scenarios for you. And what I want you to consider is, how do you think you'd feel in each of these situations? Okay, so situation number 1, it's Friday. You have worked all 5 days of the week, 8 hours a day. You accomplished 17 of the smaller tasks, but only 2 of the 5 bigger tasks. How do you think you'd feel? Now contrast this with situation number 2. It's Friday. You've also worked all 5 days of the week, 8 hours a day, but you accomplished all 5 of the big tasks and only 4 of the smaller 20 tasks. How do you think you'd feel? There is no right or wrong answer to this question. It is all hypothetical. But in most cases, people prefer situation number 2, where the 5 larger tasks are completed. Now, the key to making scenario number 2 happen is to set aside intentional time to work on those big tasks and then work without distraction. So, as I promised you, I'm going to give you the training material in order to get this done. So, what this is, it's a worksheet. I still use this to this day, but now I just use a blank piece of paper. What we want to do is set aside time on your calendar to complete one of those tasks. So you're actually going to set aside a spot for you to work undistracted. And what you want to do is use this worksheet and fill it out. Now, the first step is very easy. You're just going to write down the task that you will complete. The next thing that you want to do before you start working on it is considering, why is this important? So often I feel like we're doing tasks because they're asked of us, but we're not really stopping to consider, how does this add value to my ownership group, to my company, or to my team? And when we stop and consider that before we start a difficult task, we make it easier to follow through. Number 2, I want you to consider, how are you going to feel when this task is completed? And I think our answer to this question is really eye-opening. Some tasks, when I complete them, I'm going to feel really proud or accomplished because maybe I've never done that task before, or it's a new assignment that my supervisor has given me. Other times, I might just feel relieved when it's done, maybe because it's a task that I have done before and I know that it's a little bit daunting. Again, we want to clue our brains into, why is it worth completing this? We want to let our brains know how we're going to feel when it's done. Once you've done that, it is time to get to work. So you've picked your task, you've itemized why it's important, you know how you're going to feel when it's done. Now it's time to work on the task completely uninterrupted. And this is much harder than you think it is. All you're going to do is, anytime that you get distracted from this task, you're going to note what time it is, and then you're going to note how you tried to distract yourself. So, for example, you might say, 12:33, tried to check my email and respond to unread emails. Or 12:47, opened up my phone and almost started scrolling. Or 12:55, remembered that I ran out of flour at home, almost opened up the Target app. Again, our brains get distracted so easily. And what we want to do is use this worksheet as an anchor to keep us focused on this one task until it's completed. Now, one of the reasons why I love this worksheet is because it gives you baseline data on your ability to focus. I will be the first to admit that the first few times I started doing this, I surprised myself at how easily I was getting distracted with other work. I would sit down to work on a project, and the second that it started to get a little bit difficult, it was kind of nice to go in and answer emails and take care of things very quickly. But I started to see how that was just adding more time to the task. The more you do this worksheet, the more you're going to see that your ability to focus gets better and better and better. And the other thing that you'll notice is you'll give yourself some data as to how long it takes you to complete certain tasks, which makes planning your weeks much easier. The last part of this worksheet, it's the part that most people skip, but the part that I think is most important, is the follow-up reflection. Especially if this is a task that you're going to have to repeat again and again, what we want to do is give ourselves some reassurance about the task, or maybe some tips on how to handle it better next time. Many times my follow-up reflection has simply been, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. But other times I might have to make some notes as far as how to set myself up for success in the future. So I learned that anytime that I'm working on reports, I really cannot get interrupted.
because it takes me a minute to get back into it. So I've made the choice that anytime I'm working on reports, I'm going to tell my team I'm unavailable so that I can focus on them. And that's actually great for my team as well, because if I can get through that task faster, that means that I have more time available in my day to serve them. All right, you guys, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day, because I know how incredibly busy everybody else is. I'm on a mission to help more managers complete more work, but on less energy. So if this resonated with you, or if you know someone who needs to hear this, I would love to connect. If you're interested about hearing about more of the tools that we have available and how they can help you or your team, pop over to my website. There is a button on the top right-hand corner called Get Free Coaching. I'd be happy to talk with you about how we can do this on a one-to-one basis. Or I'm also working with property management teams, and I also do public speaking on the tools available. So again, I appreciate you spending some time with me today. Have a wonderful afternoon.